Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Ecclesiastes, after examining life, comes to the conclusion that vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Or as Eugene Peterson puts it in his paraphrase of Ecclesiastes, all is smoke, nothing but smoke. William Brown, in his commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes, puts it something like this: but the examined life is not worth living. Hi, I'm Bruce Spangler, and I'm inviting you for the next 4 Sundays to join me in a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. In the Hebrew Scriptures, Ecclesiastes is part of that wisdom literature tradition. You know, many people would have attributed, we may have been raised on it was from that Solomon wrote them, but more than likely it was written between 450 and 200 before the Common Era. And really what it is, it's a collection of sayings, it's a collection of the musings of a wisdom teacher, of a sage. And that same scholarship suggests that what we have here is actually those recordings, if I may, by one of the teacher's students. So before us, we have what is now collected, recorded, and now preserved for us to have this kind of student notebook for us. And in that notebook, or in this tradition, is the invitation to examine one's life. Socrates is on something. The unexamined life is not worth living. If it is true that evil is the lack of any moral reflection, then we truly are in danger. Our world is in danger without that kind of reflection. So all cultures kind of have this invitation to join that process, and it's kind of that journey from naivete to maturity. But we see it in a variety of places. We see it in a variety of cultures. One of the earliest, of course, would be the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Mesopotamian poem that is this kind of invitation to what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be human for me at this moment, in this life, at this time? I want to suggest that the Ecclesiastes does some of the same thing of inviting us. We also see that kind of invitation in the book of Job, that once again part of the wisdom tradition, but in Job you begin to see a highlight of one individual as that individual does some reflection on their part, and especially reflection on what does it mean to be someone who suffers and to suffer immensely, to have huge losses. One of the things that is powerful in Job is there's a level of honesty. There's a level of angst and anger, and that anger is directed at God in very powerful language and very powerful actions. Job, despite our being taught that Job is so patient, Job is far from patient. He is shaking his fist at God and even making the accusation that God, you need to be hauled into court to be held accountable for this human condition, for this level of suffering that humanity oftentimes experiences. But the book of Job is once again an invitation to reflect on life, not only in terms of its joys, but also in terms of its sorrows. We also see it in Homer's Odyssey as well, as this invitation to move from naivete to a level of maturity. So I hope that you will join with me in the next 4 Sundays in that kind of journey. I remember when I was about 15, 16 years old, my grandfather had a good habit of finding good summer work for me, and sometimes that was digging potatoes or stalking tobacco. And those were difficult jobs for a city boy, but he always found something good for me. And one time he found this summer-long job of mowing the yard for a couple of folks who were elderly. Their yard was about a football field large in that capacity, and I only had just a little 20-inch push mower to mow it, so it was an all-day process. And so as I would push that mower throughout the day, it was just sometimes drudgery from one week to the next. I wasn't driving at the time, and so Mr. McCarter would come and pick me up and bring me over to the house to mow the grass. Oftentimes he would share little bits of wisdom. He was about 90, 92 years old and having difficulty driving the car. And I think at that point that I was pretty close to meeting my maker quite early in life because of his driving habits. But one day he turned to me and he said, "You know what, son? That youth is a great, great thing. And it's just a darn shame it's wasted on those who don't appreciate it." You know, that has stuck with me all these almost 50 years of, that's kind of an invitation. It was an invitation for me to be reflective on my youth, so to speak. But it kind of prompted me in that way. And so that's what I hope that we can do in our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, Ecclesiastes is only 12 chapters long, but in the last chapter, in the concluding chapter, I'd like to read to you some of the verses, I guess the first 8 verses. And in some ways, this is a reflection on life from the age of when someone is becoming quite mature, where the body functions are beginning to diminish, the ability to see, the ability to hear, and those kinds of things, and one's energy is low. You kind of name those kinds of things, even where the hair turns white. But listen to these words. These are probably quite familiar with you, but I'm going to ask you to ponder those, to consider this as a jumping off point for our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. But let me read it for a moment. And I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years draw near when you will say, 'I have no pleasure in them.' Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return with the rain. In the day when the guards of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the women who grind cease working because they are few, and those who look through the windows see dimly. When the doors on the street are shut and the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. When one is afraid of heights and terrors are in the road, the almond tree blossoms. The grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails. Because all must go to their eternal home, and the mourners will go about the streets before the silver cord is snapped, and the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher is broken at the fountain, and the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher. Vanity, all is vanity." Well, during this study, I will be using a little book that I have written some years ago. It's called Thus Spoke Zebediah. I call it the SMV version of the book of Ecclesiastes, and that stands for the Smoky Mountain version. This was one venture for me in terms of contemplating my own life, my own roots, with Appalachian roots. But most importantly, it's a reflection on, that journey that Gilgamesh, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Homer's Odyssey, or in the book of Job, or all we do in one way or another. So I'll be using this along the way. You can actually go to Amazon and look it up. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is totally free of charge. So I hope that you will at least take a time to look at it. But I'll be drawing on this resource occasionally during the next 4 Sundays. But most importantly, I'd like for you to listen to a sermon by Fred Craddock. Fred Craddock, the greatest homiletic teacher that I know in my lifetime, and just a fantastic, insightful, and yet articulate preacher. He was the homiletic professor at Candler School of Theology, where I went and had the opportunity to hear him preach a couple of times. But I'd like for you to listen to one of his sermons that he preached in 1981. It was at the chapel for the seminary students as well as the faculty there. And he preaches this sermon on the book of Ecclesiastes, in particularly chapter 12. The name of the sermon is When Clouds Come After the Rain. And all you have to do is go to your browser on your internet, type in Fred Craddock, Craddock, and then type in the title of the sermon, When Clouds Come After the Rain. And it will pop up on the Pitts Theology Library. And I hope that you'll give it a listen. I'm going to ask you that be your homework for next time. It's about 20 minutes long. Fred Craddock has an interesting way of ending his sermon, so don't be surprised by the way at which it ends. Or, I just kind of give you that insight. But also, take a look at that. Read the book of Ecclesiastes, and I will plan on seeing you next Sunday. The only other request I have for you at this time is please don't sandbag on looking at Ecclesiastes 12. See you next week.